America is an amazing country filled with wonderful people who do incredible things. But too often, the media and liberal politicians ignore big parts of our nation and the people who make it work. So I'm speaking with leaders and policymakers who deal with real problems every day. I'm Ronna McDaniel, and this is Real America. Today, I'm speaking with Congressman Carlos Gimenez from Florida. We're going to cover the real impact of Democrats' socialist agenda and the failure of the Biden administration to stand up for freedom in Cuba and Venezuela. We're also going to talk about his view as a former mayor and fire chief of the devastating consequences of defunding the police. I'm so excited to welcome Congressman Carlos Gimenez with me on Real America. Welcome to my podcast.
It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm going to go through a lot of things today as we have a discussion, but I want to introduce you to our listeners and our viewers because you are part of this new, exciting freshman class of congressional members. You came from the Miami area. Mm-hmm. You have a backstory. You and your wife, Lourdes, fled Cuba. Tell me about that. Tell me about how you came to the United States.
Well, I came when I was almost 7.
Okay.
It was November of 1960. And I still actually have my flight ticket.
Do you really?
Yeah, I found it, yeah. November 3rd, 1960, that's when I came over on National Airlines.
Which doesn't even exist anymore.
Doesn't exist anymore, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and so my father was a rancher in Cuba. My mother, worked, as a mom. My grandmother's actually Irish-American.
Okay.
Yeah, so she met my grandfather. My grandfather was a Basque descent, Cuban from Basque descent, who played highlight at Miami Highlight.
Okay.
And then apparently my grandmother came down from vacation. She was born in Long Island, came down, and
fell in love?
We think they met, and then the next thing I know, and I still have it, we have their marriage license from Key West, Florida. That's where they got married, and apparently that's where they took the ferry to go back home to Cuba, and that's where she was, and I had my mom. And so when the revolution happened, I was in kindergarten, and one day, I asked my dad, "Hey, have the Russians and the Americans ever got into a fight? Whatever, who would win?" And then he told me, "Well, the good people, and the good guys, and the bad guys, and about that, and and the Americans are the good guys, and so hopefully they would win." And I said, "No, the Russians will win because they're more powerful."
Really?
Yeah. And so he said, "Where'd you learn that?" And he goes, "Well, that's what they taught me in school." I says, "Oh, that's what they're teaching you in school?" I says, "Okay." A month later, we were out of there.
Really?
Yeah, they were indoctrinated.
Just from that conversation?
Yeah. Well, look, he wasn't with the revolution, but that was that was a cherry on top. That was the kicker, the straw that broke the camel's back. And he decided that was enough. That they were going to indoctrinate me. They were eventually going to indoctrinate my sister. And so, we left. And then we left to Miami. My uncle, my maternal uncle by marriage, is actually my aunt. And her 7 kids were living in a house along with another family called the Ortegas, and a couple of other friends and other relatives. And so there were about 21 people living in that house when we showed up. And so the way that it worked is my father, who was a rancher, professional, and my mother started working for Orkin because she could speak English very well. I mean, obviously perfectly. And my dad started working as a bellhop in the Seville Hotel in Miami Beach. And my uncle was like the maternal figure. He was the patriarch, right? And so every night when my father and my older cousins would come back from the beach from working, they would all throw their money on the table. My uncle was working as a draftsman, although he was an architect in Havana in Cuba. He didn't have an architecture license here in the United States,
okay.
So he worked as a draftsman. He was working for a company, and so they would all throw their money on the table. He would pick it up, and he would provide for the entire 21 people, and actually even sent us to. He thought, Catholic school was very important, and so we were all sent to Catholic school about 3 blocks away, St. Michael's, and we were educated there. We lived together for probably about 2 or 3 years, and then everybody kind of split up into their own homes.
Do you remember coming to Florida and how you felt? I mean, was it a big change for
No,
you?
I mean,
Was it frightening
no,
at all?
no, it wasn't frightening. I
'Cause you
mean,
were
I
so
can't,
young?
no, I can't, yeah, I was young. And look, I do remember this, that my first semester at school, I got straight F's because I didn't speak the language at all. I didn't speak one word of English.
You didn't speak any
Not
English.
one word. My grandmother didn't teach me. My
And your
mother
mom didn't teach you?
me either. As a matter of fact, they probably used it as a weapon. They whenever they
Talk
wanted
English behind your back?
Yeah, exactly, right in front of me. And I'm like, what the heck are they saying? You know, and so my first word in English was tomorrow, because there was a Cuban kid at the school. Most of them were Americans. There was only about one Cuban in that class, and he kind of was translating for me. And he goes, well, when was the first day of class? And tomorrow. That means, tomorrow, mañana is tomorrow. Okay, that was my first word in English that I learned, mañana, tomorrow.
You remember that?
I remember that, yeah.
How crazy. So
Yeah.
you get all F's, and then
All F's, and then the second semester.
How quickly did it?
All A's, second semester.
All A's.
Yeah, that's how, just like that, picked it up.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
My brother and my sister-in-law's from Colombia. My brother and his wife often speak Spanish in front of us, so
Right.
we don't know what they're saying, but
Right.
I'm a lot better than they think. So I love that story.
Yeah.
So then, do you think your parents ever understood the sacrifice? I mean, did they ever talk about what it meant for them to leave everything behind?
No,
and come here?
It was painful for their entire lives. I mean,
But they wanted to give you that future.
Well, yes, and for them it was very painful because they led a very good life in Cuba. My dad must have been in his 30s maybe, and my mom maybe early 30s when we came over. So, all of their upbringing, their youth was spent in Cuba, and it was always very painful. They always wanted to go back. They always thought they were going to go back. The initial group of Cubans that came thought it was going to be a 6-month ordeal, and then, another revolution would happen and it would be overturned, and then they would all go back. In that house that I was, there were 3 members of that house that actually were part of the Bay of Pigs invasion.
Wow.
2 of them ended up being prisoners, my cousin and then his best friend. My other cousin never got off the boat, never got off the ship before they turned around and went back because it was, it failed. And, they blamed a lot of it on the Kennedy administration, lack of air support. My cousin said that they were winning the battle. They were winning the battle and the war, I guess, until they ran out of bullets.
Okay.
And what happened was that a couple of the supply ships that were supposed to give them the 2nd day, 3rd day ammunition, et cetera, were sunk by an old American jet trainer, all right? And had the Americans just given air support, those trainers would never had a chance. They would have never sunk those ships. And then, the invasion probably would have succeeded. But because of that call, there was a lot of resentment to the Kennedy administration and what they did.
So I think you being a new congressman,
Mm-hmm.
being from the Miami area is really timely right now with what's happening in our world. And I'm going to talk about it on 2 fronts. The first is the Democrat Party really is becoming more socialist, more communist. They're embracing so many things. And Cuban Americans really understand this because they've been there, they fought it, they fled it, they understand the American dream. What are you seeing as warning signs that other Americans may not be seeing because of your history and what your family went through?
I mean, I think the first thing that really concerns me is this whole thing of tech censorship.
Yes.
And then now that the president is saying that they want the tech companies to censor certain information, where the government is actually being involved in censorship, is really, really dangerous. It's under the guise of misinformation, right? And so who's the arbiter of misinformation? Who decides what's true and what's not true? And I think that it's actually an insult to the American people. The American people are smart enough to figure out what's right and what's wrong, what's real and what's not real. Are there always going to be people on the other side that believe something that you and I don't believe? Yeah, that's what's called debate, right? And so I believe that the best defense against misinformation or another side is more information. And more debate, not less debate. That's really, really something which is very, very dangerous. And we see it, in Cuba. You can't speak your mind. You can't, you're only going to get one side. The truth, right, is what the government tells you is the truth. There's no freedom of the press. There's no freedom of speech. You have people looking. There's things in Cuba. It's called Committee for the Defense of the Revolution.
Okay.
Okay, and it's not really a committee. What it is that in every neighborhood you'll have one or two people that are actually working with the government to spy on you. All right, and so when you say, oh, gee, I don't think Castro's very good. I don't think that Diaz-Canel is doing this, that, or the other. You could, in the middle of the night, end up with security forces at your door, knocking down your door, and then taking you away because you said something wrong against, or you're a counter-revolutionary, and so you're a threat, to the Cuban people. Look, in the Cuban Constitution, there's a couple of articles there. I think you and I would say, what? Number one, that how at least my values are God, family, country, right?
Yep.
In kind of that order, right?
Exactly.
Okay, right. Well, in Cuba, the values are the Communist Party first, the second comes country, and then third comes the individual. All right. And so in Cuba, in the Constitution, it's the Communist Party that supersedes everything.
Supersedes everything.
Everything.
Your family,
Everything.
God, religion.
God.
Everything.
They don't believe in God, okay? But it supersedes everything, all right? There's another article in the Cuban Constitution which is a little even more, well, it's not as bad. It's pretty bad, okay? So here it is. It says that communism is the way. Anybody who wants to change that is now an enemy of the state. All right, and can be dealt with in any shape or manner deemed fit, including armed force. So that if you want to, there is no changing. See, there is no process in the Cuban Constitution to change away and to get away from communism, because it's part of the Constitution that if you want to do that, you're a traitor and you have to be dealt with.
So you're seeing this, and I've been to Miami many times and campaigned many times and talked to so many Cuban Americans, Venezuelan Americans who are saying, why aren't Americans paying attention to this? The media, it's not just big tech. It's the media. It's the propaganda machine. We saw this in the election, suppressing information about Hunter Biden, or that it came from the Wuhan lab, the coronavirus. And now, like you said, it's gone a step further with the Biden administration openly admitting that they are working with Facebook to stifle misinformation, which is freedom of speech.
Right, exactly.
So how do we educate? How would you, if you were talking to a young voter who thinks, this is great, this is wonderful, that the Biden administration's right, it is misinformation, we should clamp down on this misinformation. How do you explain to them what this can lead to?
Well, you have to explain to them what it can lead to. That's a very, very slippery slope. All right?
It is.
And it's an extremely slippery slope because it starts out with, well, it's about your health and welfare. And then the next thing you know, well, it's about, economic truth, and it's about political truth. And these people are dangerous. We need to, shut them down. We need to shut them up and all that. And so, and it all leads to, one place, and it leads to one ideology, one party having all the power, and it leads to a shutdown of debate. Look, America is built on freedom of speech, freedom of religion, all freedoms. All right, we need to have that. One of the things that's most concerning to me too is what's happening in colleges, that only one side is allowed to speak, and then you have students telling the administration, oh, you can't allow so and so to speak because we don't agree with them. That's what colleges are for.
Exactly.
Okay,
it's debate.
Exactly.
If what we're saying is so wrong, then you shouldn't be afraid for people to hear it.
Right, and if
because
you don't
let them have a dialogue. If what we're saying is so awful, they'll be smart enough to figure that out, but they're gonna let them learn that for themselves and determine that for themselves. But there is this spoon-fed mentality. Americans aren't smart enough to figure this out. So we have to dilute and censor and prepackage our messaging and put it through all these mediums and refuse freedom of thought, speech, debate, and actually demonize that.
Right, exactly.
It's interesting to me, and I would love to hear your take with what's happening with, go ahead.
It's actually an insult to our intelligence. It's saying that American people are too dumb to figure this out.
Exactly.
Okay, and that's another way that we as conservatives have to say, look, you're actually your intelligence is being insulted. You're all being, basically labeled as dummies, that we have to do this for you because you can't figure it out on your own.
Because you're not smart enough to figure it out. And we're the intellectuals, the elitists. We're all the Ivy League grads.
Right.
And we'll figure it out for you, and we'll let you know.
Because you're too dumb to figure that out.
We'll let you know what you should think.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And that's how we should package it.
It's so true.
Yeah.
And I think the American people are seeing through this. I really do. But right now in Cuba, we are watching people in the streets clamoring for freedom. And you have seen the Biden administration be pretty much radio silent on it.
Right.
And there was an interesting interview this weekend with a Washington Post reporter saying the Democrats are quiet because they agree with a lot of what communism stands for right now. How do you feel? How frustrating is it to you to be a congressman and to see Biden not standing up for freedom and standing up to the communist regime in Cuba?
Well, look, as a Cuban, I'm insulted, but as a congressperson, somebody who's in the political world, I understand what he's doing, because how can he go against the very ideology that the left, the extreme parts of his party, which are becoming more mainstream of his party, are actually telling us that this is what we need to have here. You know, Bernie Sanders, thought, Cuba and what was going on in Cuba was great, that we were somehow being, we were taught how to read and write. Great. Well, my God, gee, nobody in Cuba knew how to read and write before the revolution. Why, gee whiz. That's how dumb he is, okay? He doesn't understand it, And then AOC, the reason why the Cubans are protesting is because of the cruel American embargo. No, they weren't saying end the embargo, okay? By the way, AOC, end the embargo is para el embargo. If you don't know that in Spanish, that's what they'd be saying. They're saying libertad. Libertad is freedom. Give us freedom. We've had enough of this regime. The regime needs to go because the regime is what's causing our misery. Why is it causing our misery? Because it's a failed economic model. It's a failed.
We're living in poverty.
Exactly.
We can't think for ourselves.
Yeah.
We live in fear.
Communism
People
doesn't work.
People don't understand that. It doesn't work.
It doesn't
and we
work.
are the last defense. I remember for our convention, and I don't know if you saw it, we had Maximo Alvarez speak. And he touched me so much because he said when he fled Cuba, his dad said to him, fight for this country, fight for the United States, because if we lose this country, there will be nowhere else to go.
That's right.
There will be nowhere else to go. And
That's right.
Watching defund the police and censorship of speech and all the things that are happening, it really is frightening. And I'm glad you're there as a voice pushing this out. And it's also Venezuela too. They pulled back the sanctions on Maduro, and what's happened since the Biden administration has done that?
No, well, I think also he just pulled some sanctions off of the oil company too. And so, you're killing our oil sector here in the United States. You're allowing the Russians to have their oil sector by approving their pipeline, and then you're also taking away some of these sanctions away from the Venezuelan oil companies, basically to prop up the Maduro regime. What happened in Venezuela was totally predictable. We told the Venezuelans, because a bunch of them are living in Miami, and we said, this is what's going to happen to you. This is going to happen. This is going to happen. This is going to happen. And eventually you're going to lose your freedom. And they, oh, no, we're Venezuela. We're different. We're not Cubans, et cetera, et cetera. Now they all come back to me and say, by the way, you were right. We should have listened to you. I said, yeah, you should have listened to him. And by the way, the same thing should happen here in the United States. You got to listen to us, all right? Because you may never think it's going to happen. They never thought it was going to happen in Venezuela. And I'm not saying it's going to happen here, but there are signs here that people want to take us in that direction. And we need to be very, very cognizant of that. And we need to reject it outright. The system doesn't work. Communism never works. Socialism doesn't work. And it'll never work. And one of the things the Black Lives Matter put out a tweet about the organization now, put out a tweet about it. And talked about the embargo and this. And then they said, one of the great things of the Cuban Revolution is that they export their doctors and their nurses to other countries so that they can help them with their health problems. They export them, all right, for a price. Those doctors and nurses are sent to other countries, and those countries pay the Cuban government for the services of those doctors and those nurses. Guess who doesn't get that money? The doctors and the nurses. Okay, and so BLM is actually saying one of the great things about the Cuban communist regime is modern day slavery.
Exactly.
Okay? And
my goodness.
I'm like, what? These people just either they don't understand it or they do understand it, trying to fool everybody. Okay, but they're not going to fool the Americans.
Well, that's the thing that's so important about this election, and I know you're one of 15 new House members. We're 5 seats away from taking back the House. Mm-hmm. But it's not just a difference of opinions anymore. It's not, Republicans and Democrats, we have a difference on whether it should be a 30% corporate tax or 20%. It is a fundamental reworking of our country as we know it.
Yes.
And as they talk about getting rid of the filibuster, stacking the Supreme Court, getting rid of our energy independence, not supporting freedom in Cuba. Pay attention, folks. Big tech censorship, controlling the media, misinformation campaigns. I mean, we are on the path to becoming a different nation where everything we stand for will be completely upended if we do not win in this next election.
I agree 100%. And look, one of the things he just said, packing the Supreme Court. When Chavez won, back in around 2005 or so, one of the first things he did, he packed the Supreme Court of Venezuela. And there have been 45,000 cases filed against the government since then, all right, and that have made it to the Supreme Court. You know how many cases the government has lost in the Supreme Court of Venezuela?
I'm gonna guess zero.
Zero. 45,000 is zero. That's a heck of a winning streak.
That's a pretty good winning streak.
That's right. And so when the Democrats talk about packing the Supreme Court here, again, just like censorship, all right, that is unbelievably dangerous. Unbelievably dangerous. And the fact that they go out and talk about it openly,
don't even hide it.
they don't even hide it. Okay, you're right. They just think that they have enough, power, and then they're going to stack that Supreme Court, and that, thank God for a couple of Democrats in the Senate that say no. Okay, if not, we would see more. They'd be packing the Supreme Court right now. Then all of their radical agenda, which is probably unconstitutional, would probably be found to be constitutional by the Supreme Court, because they're going to pick, people, ideologues, right, extremists that will interpret the Constitution in the way that they want the Constitution to be interpreted.
So you've seen a difference with Secretary Mayorkas in telling people coming here from Mexico through that border, please come, you're welcome. But now we have people trying to come here from Cuba, and it's a totally different policy. What do you make of that discrepancy in this administration?
I think that should be consistent policy.
I agree.
Okay, should be totally consistent. And so,
why do you think they're doing it? Is it because Cuban voters would be more Republican? I mean, what's the difference? I don't want to be that cynical, but I'm curious. Why would asylum seekers from one country be given the ability to come here and valued and put forward by the secretary as people who should come here, and others being said, no, we don't want you to come?
Look, I mean, we've taken the leadership, and the elected leadership have said that we don't want an exodus from Cuba. That's what they do in order to, basically relieve the pressure. Okay. And it's also very, very dangerous. I mean, thousands of Cubans have died on in that stretch of the Florida Straits. Okay, so we don't want to do that. But by the same token, I think that we need to shut down our border. We need to protect our southern border. I've been there a couple of times, and so it should be consistent. Be consistent. No, you can't come illegally here, and you can't come here either. Okay, and so. I think that should be the right thing. Why one yes and why not the other one doesn't make sense to me, especially since the ones that are leaving Cuba, you can see quite clearly that they're being oppressed.
Exactly. Right?
And so they have a really good reason why they want to leave Cuba. Not to say that the other migrants, that they're looking for a better life, okay? And I understand that, but there should be a legal process.
But there is a problem by not having sound immigration policy.
Of course.
And that's what I think a lot of people don't understand.
Mm-hmm.
This is a country that welcomes people with open arms. We are made up of immigrants who have lived and shaped the American dream.
Right.
But when you don't have sound policy, not only are you putting our country in flux, but you're putting these families that are jeopardizing their kids, themselves, their safety in harm's way by coming into our country illegally. Why not just fix it? Why can't, I know why. It's a political football, but it does seem like something that could have been fixed. The Trump administration really did with Remain in Mexico policy. You stay in Mexico while you're seeking asylum. There were lots of things put in place under the Trump administration that worked. And the Biden administration says, oh, it worked, but it was done by a Republican, so we're going to abandon it.
It was much more humane. It's humane for the family. Look, we're splitting families up right now. Why? Because you have this thing that if you're under 7 years old, that you can stay on this side of the border, right? And so now if you're under 17 by yourself, you can stay on this side of the border. And if you're being accompanied by a child of under 7, that you can now also do, come to the side of the border. And so you're splitting families up all over the place. You're actually being much less humane than what the Trump administration, put forward. And you're incentivizing, people to travel thousands and thousands of miles, okay, to get to the border, pay thousands and thousands of dollars to criminals,
Yep.
okay, to get you over the border. You should have a sound policy. This is how you get into the United States. This is how you emigrate into the United States. This is our immigration policy. These are the numbers, et cetera. And then we have a right as a nation, as a sovereign nation, to guard our borders, just like any other nation, all right?
I know that Republicans have an appetite to work on these issues.
Yes,
I
we do.
know that we do. I know people like
Yeah.
you and many people in our party would work with Democrats to say, let's come up with
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
Have you seen that across the aisle at all? Have you seen an appetite to say, let's tackle tough issues? I understand there's things around the margins that you can agree on, but I don't feel, and correct me if I'm wrong, anything from Nancy Pelosi that says, how do we solve major issues? I mean, let's look. It's a influx of people coming, but beyond that, the opioid crisis,
Oh, yeah.
the 800% increase just across our Texas border on just fentanyl.
Yeah.
This is a huge problem that has consequences across our whole country. Have you seen anything like that in Congress?
No, not at all. And I think that the immigration issue, staying alive, they think it works for them, and so I don't. I think it's going to backfire on them. They think that all Hispanics somehow are going to be Democrats in the end, and then they got a rude awakening in my district. Okay, they won that district by 16 points in 2016. They lost it by 5 in 2020. So that's a 21-point swing.
And what do you attribute that to?
I attribute that to a lot of it to the defunding the police, the socialism aspect, what was going on in Venezuela and now what's going on in Cuba. They're being very weak on that. And so that's what I attribute, most of that. And they liked President Trump's the way that he stood up to folks, and some of the things that he said, and that it was America first. All right. Look, we're here because we love America, okay? All right? And so I told this to a group of people, the other day, that I actually may love America more than you do because you were born here maybe, all right? And you may not love it as much as I do because you've always had it, right? You kind of, I lost something and now, I found it here. And I love this country. I love this country very deeply.
It was a choice for your family.
It is. Actually, I came here by choice. I wasn't born here.
Yeah.
Right? And so,
I love that.
Yeah, and so there are a lot of the Hispanics we're not monolithic. We're not the same. We don't even speak the same. All right, we speak the same language, but we have different accents. We have different tastes. We listen to different music. We eat different foods, and all. We are kind of bound together by a language, a common language. But it doesn't mean that we're all the same. But we do have, I think, general values that actually align more with the Republican Party than with the Democrat Party.
And that's why we've had so many gains. Yeah. But what would you say the Republican Party is for? If you were talking to somebody who'd never met us, who didn't know what the Republican Party stood for, somebody who'd never encountered a congressman before, what would you say? This is what I believe. This is what our party stands for.
I believe that our party believes in love of country, love of the flag, love of God. I think we're pro-life, and so we love life. We love liberty. We love freedom. We also want to make sure that we give our kids more opportunity, better opportunity than when we had. Our children and our grandchildren. We're about our children and our grandchildren and what kind of country we leave them. We don't want to leave them in debt. That's why we're fiscally responsible. We want to have a country that is free of crime as much as possible. And so we believe in law and order. We believe in the rule of law. We believe in contracts. We believe that when you write something down, when you shake somebody's hand, that you mean it. And that you maybe don't even need a piece of paper. That's what I think the Republican Party is to me and what it should be.
I love your passion. I can feel it. How are you enjoying being in Congress? I mean, you are a freshman congressman. Yeah. You've been here, just over 6 months?
Yeah, around there.
What has been kind of the most eye-opening experience, and then what are you enjoying or looking forward to the most?
I thought that it was going to be very, very partisan. I mean, because of the mood of the country. Well, I enjoy learning the process. I enjoy, being with my colleagues. I don't enjoy the bickering, the partisanship. I certainly don't enjoy, the direction that this Congress is going, what they're trying to do, how much money they're spending, how they're putting our kids and our grandchildren in debt, how they're, increasing inflation, basically a tax on all of Americans right now, and their policies. Their policies are wrong. Their policies will never work. I've seen it. I know they won't work. And so that's kind of
How
frustrating.
motivated are you to get the House, to get those 5 seats and,
Oh,
and
absolutely.
move that? I mean, doesn't it just motivate you?
Oh my God, yeah.
It's so much is set by the speaker, the
Yeah.
agenda, what comes to the floor,
Yeah.
committee assignments.
Yeah.
People don't understand how much power is held in that gavel of the speakership.
Speaker Pelosi has held her conference. I think I've only seen Democrats come over a few times, maybe 2 of them on really big pieces of legislation. Only 2 have come in 6 months, have flipped over. And so she rules with an iron fist. She may rule, she absolutely rules with an iron fist. And so
They know they do not cross.
No,
Nancy
they don't.
Pelosi.
And then also they're the ones that may, be more moderate. When they say, anybody who's going to run against me and say, well, I'm going to be a moderate Democrat. No, you're not. You're lying. And I'll tell you why. Because, here's the record of all the Democrats in this Congress. None of them have been moderate. They've all been extreme.
They all run one way and govern
exactly.
it different. They govern California, San Francisco, whatever.
Oh, they may actually feel more moderate, but they're not allowed to be. They're not allowed to have their own voice. They have to follow now the extreme left, this socialist, part of the Democrat Party. There are no more moderate Democrats. They don't vote with moderate people, okay?
Yeah.
So they've gone all the way to the left. And you know what? One of the reasons I ran for Congress, look, I've had a pretty successful career and life here in the United States, and that's why I love this country so much. One of the reasons I ran, is I don't want my children or grandchildren to have to go through what I did, okay? And by the way, if they did, say, hey, look, we need to leave because, I got to take you to a place of freedom. Where am I going to go?
Where are you going to go?
Exactly. Where am I going to go? All right. And where are they going to go? I got to fight for them right now, right here, right now.
I love that. And you do have such an interesting background. I want to talk about that a little bit. You were a fire chief.
Yes.
So you're fire chief, mayor, congressman.
Yeah.
Mayor. I want to talk about the mayor time.
Yeah.
Especially with your experience as a first responder and watching what the Democrats have done with the defund the police movement. And I say it's not just defund, it's demean, demoralize.
Yes,
You're
right.
having people quitting at record levels,
Right.
And not signing up. As a mayor and that background, how does that feel to you? What experience do you bring that how detrimental that would be for a community and the safety to have your police department defunded or your first responders?
Look, people ask me, hey, what do I think about Bill de Blasio? I love Bill de Blasio because I was the mayor of Miami-Dade, okay? That means that people would be coming down from New York, leaving New York to come to Miami-Dade. And it's half fun, I'm saying this, okay? But Bill de Blasio was great for Miami. And so when I look at that, I says, these are crazy. This is just lunacy, all right? You think that somehow social workers are going to be responding to domestic violence, calls and all that, and then somehow they're going to, you're going to have social programs take care of all these ills, and they're crazy. You have social programs that intervene at a young age, and you deviate and you divert people from young men and women from a life of crime at an early age. But once they've made that choice and now you're a criminal, all right? Now you're a criminal, all right? Things change, okay? So it's like a carrot and a stick. Hey, go this way, things are gonna be better for you, we'll help you, okay? Or you can go that way and it's not gonna be good for you.
And there's gonna be consequences.
And there's gonna be consequence to this, okay? And so as the mayor, we had tough financial times in the county when I first became mayor. I still dropped the tax rate to the lowest tax rate, biggest tax cut in Dade County history I initiated. Had about a $400 million gap in our funding. I got concessions from the employees, and I got concessions from the union.
You sound like a Republican.
And I was able to, go ahead and close that gap. But I have to, as mayor, I have no option. I have to have a balanced budget.
Balanced budget.
I can't have deficit spending. Okay. All right. And so it's something I think they need to learn here about deficit spending. So, we did that, and that takes prioritization. You have to prioritize what's important. And there are some things you may want to do that you won't be able to because you don't have the money to do it. All right.
But
and I
you
can't
would
borrow
always
for it.
prioritize the police.
You should always.
You
I
always are going to, because how can
Public
you do
safety.
anything if you don't have public safety?
We have to.
How do you get a business to start up? How do you have kids walk to school and feel safe?
We have to.
We're in D.C. right now. A 6-year-old girl was just shot and killed in D.C.
Yep.
because they have embraced defund the police. And
Right.
then today the mayor comes out and says, you know what? We need the police to work overtime if it's necessary. Well, that would have been nice a month ago. It's so important to hear stories like yours. And the perspective you bring to Congress, being a first responder, being a mayor, being an executive, being a businessman, helps so much as we're navigating all of these issues, and especially with the Democrats embracing socialism and communism.
Right.
It is a critical time for you to be here. I'm so grateful for you to be in Congress at this time, in this place. Thank you for your service, and thank you for coming on my podcast.
Anytime you ask, I'll be happy to come back.
I appreciate it so
I appreciate
much.
our conversation.
Do you
very
want to
much.
sign us off in Spanish?
Vamos a triunfar en 2020, en el año 2022. Lo necesitamos porque el futuro de esta nación está en juego en el año 2020, el año 22, y estas elecciones son muy, muy importantes para el futuro de América. Gracias y que Dios lo bendiga a todos.
Mucho gusto. Gracias.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm Ronna McDaniel, and this is what Republicans stand for. Join us next time on Real America.